Good afternoon. Nice to see you. Oh, first, Happy New... I just screwed up your thing, didn't I, Mark? Can we go back? Yeah.
Then don't touch anything.
You'll break it. I'll break it. All right. Sorry about that. Okay. Happy New Year to everybody. It's great to see such a good turnout on the first day of winter, I think. We're already starting out in January with a record year of above average temperatures. A couple of things. Oh, thank you. Let me, again, on behalf of the Tempe History Society, welcome you, and also a little bit of feedback. Dan, can we, little feedback? Listen, in the, Brianna, all right.
And then we'll turn it down.
All right. Brianna has been doing yeoman work as the production director of these lunch talks. And she'll have to leave a little bit early. And Dan Miller, you might remember, who did 4,126 and a half exhibits. The half is he decided to retire and just walked away. But we're happy to have him back. Say hello, Dan. Just a couple of things before we start. As usual, and we never take that for granted, these lunch talks are sponsored by Friendship Village. And Friendship Village has been a supporter for a number of years now. I'm not even counting that. And that's enabled us to increase the number of lunch talks we do in a year. We've expanded into May and as early as September. So we're very thankful for that relationship. Mark Young is the Mark Young is the marketing and sales director for Friendship Village, and I'd like to invite him up to welcome you to the new year. And anybody here never heard of Friendship Village? Yeah, I didn't think so. Mark?
Thank you,
I
Vic.
get one of those shirts.
Would you like one of these shirts?
Oh, yeah.
$29.95. Welcome, everybody. We do enjoy these sponsoring these talks, and we'll continue to support it, of course. I am Mark Young, as Vic said, from Friendship Village, and I'll be stationed in the back for most of the talk today. I do have to cut out early, but I'll be here as often as possible. That's hopefully every single talk they have. So if you have any questions, please reach out. Come back to the back or reach out to me. I'm at Friendship Village, and you can find all our information on the website. And we're just very happy to be here. So thank you very much.
And thank you, Mark. When you see him, just say thank you on behalf of Friendship Village for sponsoring these lunch talks. Before we get started, there's just a couple of things that I wanted to bring to your attention that you might not be aware of that's taken place in the new year. I think everybody knows Brenda Abney, who has been the manager of the museum for 10 or 11 years now. She has left that position over great protest by some of us on the society board and others to take a higher position in the city. She is now the Assistant Director of Arts and Culture. So we're very proud of the fact that she's moved up, and she will be, as part of her job description, she'll be overseeing the museum. In the meantime, we have a new interim director, and that's Josh Roffler. I first met Josh when he was, I think, volunteering. Did you start as a volunteer?
No, not as a volunteer.
You were paid.
I was a low-level employee.
He was a low-level employee at the Peterson House, and he was still in diapers, so occasionally, that was many, many years ago. Josh has been with the museum for 25 years and is well-equipped and well understands how the museum functions, and we hope very soon the term interim will be removed and he will be the manager of the museum. Also, one more thing that distinguishes the museum from a lot of other museums, or all of them, in the Valley. The New Times, in its Best of Phoenix awards in 2024, recognized Tempe History Museum as Best Guardians of Local History. And for that recognition, we got this lousy plaque. But we hope in the future that we will be able to make more notice of that. And one other thing I will mention, I'm not sure when that's going to come, but look for it on the corner of Rural and Southern. Finally, we are going to get a LED sign that will explain and highlight a lot of the activities that are taking place for the museum, for the library, all the other venues that are on this site. If plumbers can have their own LED sign, my God, the city can afford to do it. And finally, they're getting around to that. All right, so that's what's happened since the last time we got together in November. Today is a really interesting subject. How many, let's see, when did you retire? 2010. How many were in Tempe before 2010? Aha, nearly everybody. How many have been to a Tempe park? Oh, well, then we don't need our speaker. There's no reason for that. Mark Richwine is the retired Tempe Parks and Recreation Director, and he spent over 3 decades in park management. I can give you all his history, but I don't think, how many remember Mark? Okay, let's just leave it at that and welcome Mark Richwine.
Okay, what I have up for you to see before I really get started the presentation is a map, a visual map showing Tempe parks as they are today. And you'll see they're pretty evenly distributed throughout the entire city. A few larger properties to the south and to the north, and a bunch of neighborhood parks in the middle. But since most of you don't know who I am, I'm going to tell you who I am and why I'm here today. But I'm going to kind of do it backwards. I'm going to tell you why I'm here today. So this past summer, sure, I'm going to stand right in front of the mic then. This past summer, my wife and I were on vacation, and I'm checking my email, and I see a message from Lon Griffiths. Lon's sitting right down here in front. And he said, Mark, I've got this great idea. I'd love to do one of our Historical Society talks on the history of Tempe parks. I thought, well, that's a great idea. Do you have a number for Dwayne Dawson? Fortunately, I did. So I sent it to Lon. And a couple days later, he gets back to me and he says, Dwayne says he can't do it. Do you have any other suggestions? So I said, well, there's Keith Burke, and Keith's here today. He's the deputy city manager. He was Parks and Recreation director after I was. There's Craig Hayden, which is also, he's in the audience, sitting behind me, or sitting right over there. And Craig is now the community services manager. He oversees Parks and Recreation as well as cultural and arts and the library. And I said, there's Alex Jovanovich. He would be great because he is the parks manager now. And I said, and if none of them want to do it, there's Sean Wagner, who's also sitting down here in front. He was a management assistant when I was there. And I said, one of those people I'm sure would be willing to do it. So a couple days later, I get an email back from Lon, said, nope, None of them want to do it. Do you have any other suggestions? So it ended up being me. A little bit about my background. I'm a second-generation Parks and Recreation professional. My father was a Parks and Recreation director as well. He retired as the Parks and Recreation director for Maricopa County, big parks, not little parks. But prior to us coming to Arizona, we were in a little town outside of Dayton, Ohio called Kettering, Ohio. Some of you may have heard of it, some of you may not have. But in the early 70s, Kettering, Ohio, along with a number of other agencies across the United States, was applying for a gold medal award. So the National Recreation and Park Association has an annual contest where agencies can apply, and it's called the Gold Medal for Excellence in Parks and Recreation Management. And they select 5 finalists each year, and then from the 5 finalists, they select a gold medal winner. Well, Tempe was the recipient in 1975, 1995, and 2006. Kettering was an applicant from 72, 3, 4, 5, was always a finalist, never a winner. They lost to Tempe in 75, Mesa in either 72 or 73, and Scottsdale one of those years as well. So in 1975, after losing for the 3rd consecutive time, my dad decided if I can't beat them, I'm going to join them. We moved to Arizona in 1976. So a little bit about me, my background is when we first moved here, I started working for Parks and Recreation in the summers when I was in high school, parks maintenance. And when I graduated high school, I still continued working, but it moved into a more full-time capacity. My last job with parks, I was a cemetery worker. I was the one who dug the graves at Double Butte Cemetery. And I went to ASU. I got my undergraduate degree in Parks and Recreation Management, a master's degree in Public Administration, started working full-time for the city of Tempe in 1984, and gradually moved on to different positions, becoming the Parks and Recreation Director in 1997. So from 1997 to 2010, if it went on in Tempe in the parks, I'm the person to blame. So I'm going to do a talk today about the history of Tempe Parks. How did we get to where we are today? And I'm going to break it down into 4 areas. The first being 1870 to 1914. I'm going to tell you in advance, there really isn't a whole lot about parks in that first era, but there are a number of things that help shape where parks were to go that happened in that first period. Then I'll get into 1914 to 1950, 50 to 90, and then where we are from 1990 to today. But to start, we'll take a look at 1870 to 1914. Many of you will recognize this as the picture of Hayden Flour Mill, the Hayden household, and the Salt River in the background. Sooker, about 1985, and we know this because there's no railroad bridge. Railroad bridge was built in 1888, so we know this is before the railroad bridge was actually built. But one of the most important things to happen in Arizona was the Homestead Act of 1862. What the Homestead Act allowed was any individual, didn't have to be a citizen of the United States, they could come to areas that were under homestead. They were mostly in the western territories of the United States, and they could lay claim to what's called a quarter section. As many of you know, the valley is set up on a grid system, pretty much mile by mile grid, and a quarter section would be 1/4 of that section. So it's a half-mile by half-mile square, 160 acres. A lot of land back then. One of the requirements to be able to homestead is you had to build a house, and you had to turn the land into some type of productive use. And after 5 years, if you were successful, the land would be deeded to whoever filed the homestead, provided they were still alive. The vast majority of homesteads filed in the United States were unsuccessful, meaning people didn't last those first 5 years. So, many of you know the story of Charles Hayden. Charles ended up moving from the Tucson area up to the valley in 1870, filed a homestead. So he claimed 160 acres in what now is west downtown Tempe. So his claim started somewhere in the Butte area and then moved west from the river up to probably what now is somewhere around University. In 1870, there wasn't a lot there, so he had a really big homestead. At the time, he started digging canals from the Salt River into his homestead area and farther south into Tempe. And that is critical to the growth of Tempe at that time because it afforded the opportunity for others to come in and homestead and have a reliable source of water for agricultural purposes. Being the businessman that he was, he also knew that if he built the mill, he could mill the grains and sell them back to the same people who were farming the agricultural area. So second person that filed a homestead was Niels Peterson, 1874. His homestead was much farther south, pretty much where the home of the Peterson house is now, again, a half-mile square. In a couple of short years, he had amassed over 1,100 acres of land in the city of Tempe, or what became the city of Tempe. So his holdings were almost 2 square miles in addition to his original homestead. And then another critical thing that happened, the Arizona Territorial Legislature, and I know it wasn't called Arizona State University back then, but that's what I'm referring to it. In 1885, they established Tempe as the site. So it sets Tempe up for a very productive future and as a magnet for non-agricultural activities to begin coming to Tempe because they had a source of educated workers to be able to provide to all of these new businesses. And this one I found amazing. So Mr. Peterson had acquired land where currently Tempe Double Butte Cemetery is and Tempe Diablo Stadium. In 1888, he donated 120 acres. I think it was 160. I think it was a full quarter session, but the records say 120 to the Double Butte Cemetery Association for the purposes of establishing a permanent cemetery for the citizens of Tempe. Now, the record says that cemetery, which is located up on the left part of the butte, that cemetery was in use before it officially became a cemetery. Now, that's out at 48th Street and Broadway. There wasn't anything outside or pretty much past Mill and maybe about 5th Street at that point in time. And I always thought, that's a long way to go for a funeral in 1888. Anyways, so moving forward, the first bridge was built in Tempe in 1888. It fell down in a flood of 1891. But why I chose this picture in particular is if you look at the architecture of the bridge, is you're going to see it again in about 80 years. It's going to come up in another part in Tempe. So just kind of remember all those wood and steel elements of the bridge. The most important thing that happened in that period was a decision by Judge Kibbe. It's called the Kibbe decision of 1892. And basically what the Kibbe decision did was establish water rights that went with the land. There was a big suit that was filed. The distributors of the water, the people who own the canals, they wanted control of the water so that they could maximize their profits. Kibbe said, no, 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 no. The water belongs to the landowners. And going back, as I said, since Charles Hayden filed his claim, he claimed a ton of water. So the landowners in Tempe, farmers, had guaranteed water rights. And that was really important because right after the Kibbe decision, there was a series of droughts in Arizona. And the water rights went with the land, and the Tempe owners had it first. So because of the droughts, in 1903, Congress passed what became known as the Reclamation Act. And the Reclamation Act basically established a loan, a federal loan program, where reclamation projects could be built. The feds would finance it, but as collateral for the loan, they wanted land pledged as collateral. So the Salt River Valley Water Users Association was formed in 1903 for the purposes of building what's now known as Roosevelt Dam and Lake. And that was the reclamation project. Interesting enough, in 1903, all of the lands in the city of Tempe and that were serviced by the Tempe Canal System would not join. They had the rights of the Kibbe decision. We have the water, we get it first because they were the first ones to establish the water rights. So they weren't worried too much about other property owners or new agricultural products that would start to appear in the Phoenix metro area. They got water first. They wouldn't actually join the Water Users Association until 1939. So it took 36 years for there to be enough incentive for the owners of the canal systems in Tempe and the property owners in Tempe to formally join SRP. So, like I said, the Salt River Valley Water Users Association was created for the purposes of building Roosevelt Dam. Roosevelt Dam was immediately began construction, finished in 1911, two purposes. First purpose was the primary purpose for retaining water for the Salt River Valley Water Users Association. Second, hydroelectricity to bring to the valley, which became pretty important. So in 1912, Arizona becomes a state, and we now actually have representation in Congress. Prior to that, when we were a territory, they were not afforded opportunities to be represented in Congress. And as many of you know, Mr. Hayden became Arizona's patriarch senator in Congress, the son of Charles Trumbull. In 1914, after repeated efforts to find anybody to homestead what's now Papago Park, both Phoenix and Tempe's portion, they tried for decades, since 1862, to find people to homestead it. Nobody wanted to because you couldn't grow anything on it. And the economy at the time in Arizona was agrarian, so you couldn't grow anything on it. Nobody wanted it. Over 2,500 acres approximately became the Papago Saguaro National Monument. Okay, that ends it out. So those were a lot of things that kind of established the foundation. So going forward, 1914 to 1950. So a lot happened. 1914, Ash Avenue Bridge built. And does anybody know what was the first bridge built over the Salt River in Arizona? It was not the Ash Avenue Bridge. In 1910, Maricopa County decided they wanted to build a bridge over the Salt River. And at the time, there were approximately 200 cars in all of Maricopa County. But they thought that was an important thing to have. So a contest ensued, and various proposals were submitted. The absolute best proposal that was submitted for the bridge was Ash Avenue. The distance over the river, the rock base for the abutments, by all accounts, was by far and away the best proposal. Bridge ended up going to Central Avenue in Phoenix. The Heard Museum, Mr. Heard, was a very influential person at the time, and money trumped logic. So it wasn't until 3 years later, the bridge actually at Central Avenue was built in 1911, followed by the Ash Avenue Bridge in 1914. They quickly realized in 1914 cars were bigger and wider than what they thought. It was only used as a bridge for automobile traffic for a couple of years, and then it just reverted back to pedestrian and horse traffic. So after World War I, a number of veterans were moving to the area. They had suffered the effects of mustard gas during World War I. So many of them were moving to the area for the purposes of health reasons. And a big discussion ensued is, what are we going to do for all of these families that are coming to the area? They have kids. We need something for kids to do in the summer when they're out of school. Kids had been swimming in the canals for years. There are a lot of kids that drown swimming in the canals because canals were not safe places to swim. So a citizens committee is formed, and they come up with the idea in 1922 to build a pool in Tempe Beach Park. In 1923, the pool is constructed, and it wasn't just an ordinary pool. It was a 50-meter pool. And at that time, that was really unusual. So it was an Olympic distance pool in 1923. And they had competitions from all over the place that came here. It was the first 50-meter pool in Arizona. It was one of the first 50-meter pools west of the Mississippi. And it was a huge success. Within 3 years, the initial investment and the money came from the Tempe Women's Club, Tempe Men's Club, and the Rotary Club. They all raised money for it, and the city provided the land. I'm not sure how the city got the land. I'm assuming they had bought it at one point in time from Mr. Hayden, but the record says that the city provided the land. The funding came from, again, the Men's Club, the Women's Club, and the Rotary Club. And the record says that within 3 years, the pool had been so successful, it paid off its debt. So there were people who came from California, and there would be regular field trips from all around the state that would come just for the purposes of swimming in Tempe Beach Pool. But certain people weren't allowed to swim in Tempe Beach Pool, and that would not be rectified until after World War II. So in 1930, a very wealthy businesswoman from the Chicago area, Rose Eisendrath, her husband ran a very successful glove manufacturing business in Chicago. She loved coming to the desert. She was wealthy, but she couldn't stay in any of the nicer hotels in the Metro Phoenix area. They were Jewish. So Mrs. Eisendrath loved Saguaro National Monument. She bought 80 acres of land that abutted up to the Saguaro National Monument at the time. Most of you are familiar with the Eisendrath House in North Tempe off of College. It's still there. It's run by the water department currently. Anyways, right after she bought her property, the federal government decided they would decertify Papago Saguaro National Monument. What was going to happen to the land? Nobody knew. It took 3 years for the federal government to decide to portion out the land. 2,000 acres went to the state of Arizona. Roughly 400 acres went to the city of Tempe in 1933. In between, Mill Avenue Bridge, the old Mill Avenue Bridge, opened in 1931, paving the way for traffic and tourism to come to Tempe. So it was the alignment of US 60 and Route 89, went through Van Buren, Grand Avenue, up along Apache Boulevard and out into eastern Arizona. Very important for the future development of Tempe. And at the same time, in the midst of the Depression, there were a number of WPA projects that began in Tempe and the surrounding area. Moore Park, some of you may be familiar with it. It's on Mill Avenue and Curry, both north and south. That was originally a state park as a roadside rest area for US 60 travelers. The city of Tempe did not take ownership of those two parcels until 1970. But there are remnants of the WPA project Ramadas. Those were built in 1936. And at Tempe Beach, they decided to completely enclose the park's grounds with a cobble wall. I think the only remaining pieces today are along the ball field on Rio Salado Boulevard, and then there's a little section that separates the upper and lower portion of the parks. Those are the only remnants that remain. Originally, it completely encircled the park, and the bathhouse for the pool which is in the upper photograph, the construction of the bathhouse or the pool and the cobble. In 1934 as well, and we know this because if you look at the posters on the Tempe Beach Theater, they're from 1934. So Red Harkins builds a movie theater in Tempe Beach Park. I found some kind of conflicting information, whether it operated just in 1934 or whether it operated in 1934 and 1935. But he made enough money from the operation of this movie theater in Tempe Beach Park to build a 500-seat theater on Mill Avenue. Most of you know it as the Valley Art Theater today. And I found this one as a really interesting fact. So this is not in Tempe, but it is really cool information. So as you can see, it's marked Oak, kind of in the center, 64th Street. So it's on the upper boundaries of what's now Papago Park. If you're ever in the area, it is currently ball fields that are used by, were previously spring training. Now I believe ASU uses them, but ball fields that are to the north of McDowell. So during World War II, there was a German POW camp in Papago Park. In its peak, there were over 3,000 German prisoners of war stationed right there in Papago Park. Why they chose the Phoenix area in Papago Park to house German prisoners, I have no idea. But in the spring of 1945, the Great Escape occurred. 25 German POWs tunneled, and I don't know how long it took them to build the tunnel, tunneled their way out of the prison camp, and they had seen that there was a salt river in the valley. And their plan was to make their way from the prisoner of war camp through Tempe Papago Park down to the Salt River, float their way out to the sea, and escape to either Mexico or where nether regions. So they executed their plan. They got down to the Salt River, and there was no water. So immediately, most of them turned themselves in. There were 5 prisoners that remained at large. The head of them was a German commander of a U-boat, and it took them 7 days to basically finally catch him and return him to the prisoner of war camp. Again, it's kind of a shame that they tore all that down, but really kind of an interesting fact. So, as we close the decade in 1950, there still aren't any other parks in Tempe except for Tempe Beach, which is run by the Chamber of Commerce, not the city of Tempe. Papago Park, which the city really hasn't done anything with, except they gave some land back to the state to construct a hospital site. And it's still there today. It's operated by ASU. It's just north of Curry Road, about a quarter mile to the east of Mill Avenue. So Tempe is still sitting there. Nothing really much happening. There is a proposal by Ken Clark, who was a local insurance agent. He gave 10 acres to the city for the purposes of developing a park. It's now Clark Park. Wasn't necessarily a completely altruistic decision. He was also a land developer, and he wanted a park to be able to make it more attractive to sell homes that he was planning on building in the area. Took a while for those things to happen. So now we move forward. This is the period where Tempe just blew up. After World War II, people are coming to the Metro Phoenix area in droves. Arizona State University, GI Bill, all kinds of new businesses, enterprises, and it is just a growing place. Pressure is now being put on the elected officials in Tempe. You got to do something for families. So, the first park that emerges, Daly Park. And that is shown at the kind of the bottom of your screen. And then, as you can see, right below Daly Park, Broadway Road. And you can see from the picture, there's nothing south of Broadway Road at the time. And that's 1953. Some of you may remember Old Ritter School if you've been around long enough. That was the elementary school that's now on ASU's campus. Of course, ASU. Apache Boulevard is growing leaps and bounds, again, because of US 60 and tourism traffic. So, first park in Tempe, I always think it's Tempe Beach. That's my opinion. It wasn't officially a city park. It was run by the Chamber of Commerce, but we can have disagreements. But the first true neighborhood park built in the city of Tempe, Daly Park, named in honor of E.W. Daly, who was the city manager up until 1950. Second park, neighborhood park, Clark Park. And that was donated in 1949, but not developed until after Daly Park in the early 1950s. And you can see a picture on the right-hand side of Daly Park in the 1950s, and you can see there's nothing around it. So, big thing to happen. 1953, a gentleman by the name of Vic Palmer moves to Tempe, Arizona. Some of you may know him better as Joe Sperkelly's father-in-law. Came from Elkhart, Indiana, and he moved to the Tempe area for health reasons. He immediately wanted to get started with doing something for kids. He was on the Elkhart, Indiana Parks and Recreation Board, and was really kind of surprised when he came to Tempe to find out they didn't have one. But he wanted to do something where he could be involved in Parks and Rec-like activities and, again, do something for kids. So he immediately began work with the Chamber of Commerce, and he was the chairman of the Tempe Beach Committee. At that time, that was probably one of the biggest perks one could get in the city of Tempe. Tempe Beach Park was where everything happened. So he was a, pretty popular guy, pretty well-known guy. Anyways, he's hired as the first Parks and Recreation Director in the city of Tempe, 1958, served until 1963. And he pretty much established most of what you end up seeing around Tempe today. That was kind of what he brought to the table. So, first job, Double Butte Cemetery Association, nonprofit organization, was having financial challenges. They wanted the city to take over the cemetery. Vic got it done. Vic was responsible for opening Tempe's first golf course. Not called Rolling Hills. In 1959, it was called Papa Go. Terrible name. Glad they changed it. And he began the process of developing neighborhood parks and the school park concept. I found this fascinating. I kept looking for information, Rolling Hills, Rolling Hills, Rolling Hills. Nothing came up. Put in Papago, this is what I found. In 1958, Tempe's talking about building 2 18-hole golf courses. Never happened. And in February of 1959, Tempe and Phoenix are in a heated battle over 40 acres. 40 acres of land that's bounded by the zoo to the north and Papago Park to the south. And finally, Phoenix relents. And I kind of figure the reason Phoenix relents is because they were also negotiating with the state of Arizona to take over all of Papago Park. That had been the state property since 1933. The city of Phoenix did not acquire Papago Park until 1959. Anyways, Tempe wins the dispute and immediately goes to constructing a 9-hole golf course. And you can see from the second article, literally 7 months later, a golf course is complete at Rolling Hills. 7 months to build a 9-hole golf course with lights. And if anybody wants to Google what's the first lighted golf course in the United States, it'll come back and tell you that it's the Manor Golf Course somewhere in Pennsylvania in 1964. Don't believe everything you read on the internet. I still believe this is the first lighted golf course in the United States. Now, it could be that they're getting semantics, what's considered a golf course. Rolling Hills was considered an executive golf course. Google may only want to consider ones that are a traditional golf course distance, but I still think this was the first lighted golf course built in the United States. And then we move forward into the early 60s. And again, this is something that Vic ended up establishing as kind of a principle of park planning and design. And it was popular in the West Coast in the early 60s. It's called the school park or the community-centered school park development. And if you can see on the north side, Broadway, south side, Southern, rural and McClintock, and I just chose this one arbitrarily, Myers School and Park in the middle. And the principle is that it's walk to the middle, drive to the outside. So in the middle, you have a school and park. They're located off of what are called collector-distributor streets. In this case, it's Dorsey and Alameda, but the half-mile streets in Tempe are considered collector-distributor streets that enable people to walk to those facilities. And on the outside are your commercial, higher density properties, apartments, condos, and at the corners, retail development. So walk in, park, school, drive out, shopping, businesses, etc. That concept didn't make its way into the general plan until 1967. And that became the foundation then for almost every school and park property developed after 1967. So, in the early 1960s, that pool at Tempe Beach was looking pretty tired. It was built as a drain and fill pool. And basically what a drain and fill pool is that you put fresh water in, let people swim in it for a couple days, and when the water becomes pretty disgusting, you completely drain it. The original pool never had a filtration system. So a 50-meter pool, you can imagine how many people were using it, no filtration. It got dirty pretty fast. Anyways, so a decision is made. They're going to put a new 50-meter pool at McClintock High School, and they're going to turn the old pool at Tempe Beach into a traditional 25-yard by 25-meter pool with I call it a baby pool, and two of, in my opinion, the ugliest buildings ever built in Tempe that were the bathhouse and a small recreation center, replacing the old Tempe Beach pool. So still a pool at Tempe Beach, but not nearly what it was in its heyday, and that's replaced by McClintock Pool. So then we get to spring training. 1967, Seattle Pilots. Does anybody remember the Seattle Pilots? They still exist today, but they're called the Milwaukee Brewers. So Seattle had an expansion team for 2 years. They played at Diablo Stadium for their spring training. They go away, and the Milwaukee Brewers replace them. And the Milwaukee Brewers only played at Tempe Diablo Stadium until 1972. And then nobody's playing spring training in Diablo Stadium. So the city invests quite a bit of money and to get into the spring training business, and finds out in short order that people don't want to play there. So 1993, the singing cowboy Gene Autry decides he's going to bring his Anaheim Angels to Tempe. But that's going to be part of the next chapter. 1969, probably the biggest decision since they hired Mr. Palmer as Parks and Recreation Director was this guy, Ron Pies. He's hired in 1969 as the Parks and Recreation Director, and he served in that capacity, which later transitioned into Community Service Manager until 2001. He's the guy who built almost everything in Tempe. First job, gets on board, he's meeting with Hallcraft Homes, who are planning a huge residential development between Baseline and Guadalupe, west of Mill. And they were willing to dedicate 5 acres for the construction of a park that was going to be put right up against the canal across from the Capital Castings, which manufactured steel ball bearings. Ron said, that's not going to work. And fortunately, the city council agreed. And so the process began of negotiating with the developer for a project that would buffer the residential development on the east with all the heavy industrial development on the west, on the other side of the canal and the railroad tracks. And the city eventually acquires 125 acres for Kiwanis Park, 140 acres for Ken McDonald Golf Course, and another 80 acres further south than that that doesn't get utilized until the next chapter. So right away, Tempe begins planning of its first true community park, 125 acres. And a couple things that I want to point out, which I think are really interesting. So on the top left-hand corner, or top right-hand corner, you're going to see what top left-hand corner, you're going to see what appears to be an old wooden structure. That was the original playground at Kiwanis Park. And it was done to mimic what the architect thought the Hayden compound looked like at the early 1870s. So that was the kind of philosophy behind the design. And you can see the picture doesn't do it justice, but the one below it has a railroad car. And that was done basically to celebrate the rail coming to Tempe in 1888 to service not only the citizens of Tempe, but to help move goods and products to Tempe and out of Tempe. And this never happened, but it was a design feature. So is anybody here familiar with the Dick and Jane Neuheisel Tempe Sister City Gardens in Kiwanis Park? Okay. So originally, back in there, the design was to build a series of fountains. And the fountains were to flow out of Sister City Gardens, across All America Way, by the volleyball courts and playground, kind of sweeping down, and they would eventually come out, your bottom photograph, there's like a wash area. So that was designed to mimic the bringing of water from Roosevelt Dam down the Salt River, underneath the railroad bridge through Tempe. And if you look today, the bridge that's on All America Way in Kiwanis Park, its design was to mimic the old railroad bridge I told you about, 1888. That's the concept. It's not exact, but the concept was to mirror that. Unfortunately, due to a lot of reasons, the fountains never got built. The rest of it did, but you'd never know that's what its intended purpose was just by looking at it. So then we really hit the big part. So I mentioned the community park concept. From 1960 approximately, and these are dates when the city acquired the land shortly thereafter they developed the park. It's not a true representation of when the parks came into service. But from 1960 to 1990, the city developed almost one park and one school in conjunction with the school districts a year. Just incredible. So a lot of thanks to Ron Pies and anybody who worked for him for what they did for the city of Tempe. To make it affordable, what the city did is they entered into agreements with the school districts. So Tempe Elementary, Kyrene Elementary, the city entered into partnerships with them. A lot of things were built so that they could be shared. Sometimes a basketball court would be built on school grounds, sometimes a playground would be built on city park. But they were meant to be shared by both, lighted so they could be used in the evenings. Otherwise, during the day, they would be used by kids at school. It worked out pretty good until about 1999, and then an event happened in Colorado that changed that forever. But those original parks, if you see them today, most of them are pretty flat. So the parks that are pretty much north of US 60 are all pretty flat, and many of them were done with flood irrigation. And going back to the Kibbe decision, that floodwater ran with the land. So it was much cheaper for the city to use the flood irrigation because they owned the water rights than it was to install sprinklers and use treated water to water the parks. The parks pretty much south of US 60 were developed in the 70s, and an odd phenomenon happened. The city was beginning to get concerned about where they were going to put all the rainwater when it rained. So the parks in the south became retention parks. And you'll notice the ones south of US 60, not all but most, are below grade. And during large rain events, water flows into the park and is kept there retained until it can percolate down through the soil and the ground. But that is how we ended up with retention parks in the southern part of Tempe. And I'm going to get to one of those retention parks in a little bit. So Kiwanis Park, even though it was developed in 1974, nothing really happened until 1988. And that's when the final phase of development, the Kiwanis Park Recreation Center, the batting cages, which had been built a few years earlier, all of those things kind of came into being to finalize the park. The tennis center was built in 1974, but the land between the tennis center and the ball fields sat vacant for 13 years. And while the city was building those, there was also a voter initiative. Many of you remember in 1987, voters of Maricopa County were asked to tax themselves, property tax, for the purposes of raising money to construct a Rio Salado project 38 miles from Mesa to Buckeye. Failed miserably. And that brings us to the 1990s. So, Rio Salado project begun in 1966 by ASU architecture students. What are we going to do with this ugly thing running through the Metro Phoenix area? And there's a whole bunch of timeline issues, but I'm going to drop all the way down to 1987 when the voters reject that $1.5 billion initiative. Everywhere but Tempe. Tempe voters approved it. But because it was a countywide initiative, didn't matter. That did not deter the city of Tempe from moving forward. So because the sales tax failed, Tempe had to come up with another way to finance the portion of the project to be built in Tempe. And a gentleman by the name of Pat Flynn, who was assistant city manager, he was the finance manager, came up with a plan. The plan was predicated on development around the lake to pay for the lake. And that plan was implemented in the early 1990s. Construction documents were built or drawn up, and in 1997, construction began on the Rio Salado project in Tempe and Tempe Beach Park. So by that time, Tempe Beach Park had really fell into disrepair. Nobody was going there. It wasn't a safe place. A lot of problems with it. But because of Rio Salado, Tempe Beach Park, once again, becomes the place to be, not only in Tempe, but like it was when the pool was built in 1923, it becomes the place to be in the Metro Phoenix area. It is the home to events, festivals, just general public use. In fact, some would say maybe even overuse. But in the early 2000s, after it opened, after redevelopment, it was alleged to have been the second most visited attraction in the state of Arizona. Anyways, one thing I want to point out is the entrance to Tempe Beach Park. Many of you have seen it, but so the cobble stands, they're designed to bring honor to the original cobble wall that encircled the entire park. That was the purpose of them. The steel beams are to bring honor to the railroad, which was the first bridge crossing, but for rail, not for pedestrian or car, over the Salt River. And then below, just one of the many events that takes place. But I chose this picture, one, because it honors our veterans and others that lost their lives during 9/11, but also because of the railroad bridge in the back, which is what was used as the foundation for the bridge in Kiwanis Park. And then, moving forward, so the Angels became residents of Tempe Diablo Stadium in 1993. A small renovation was done. They were sold to a gentleman by the name of Artie Marino in 2004, I think. Anyways, Artie didn't like this Diablo Stadium. He wanted a much better Diablo Stadium. So in 2005, after spring training ended, the city embarked on a renovation project that was very significant and reopened it 10 months later, 2006, for spring training as the newly renovated Diablo Stadium, much as you see it today. And Craig, I think there's another renovation coming again. Correct. So it is going to be a long-term home for Tempe Diablo Stadium. I had mentioned earlier when the city was buying land for Kiwanis Park, Ken McDonald Golf Course, and another park, 80 acres in South Tempe. That's it. Again, up against the railroad track, it is north of Warner. Warner's the street to the south. Knox is the street to the north. 80 acres was purchased. City had no idea what it was going to do with it when it bought it in the 1970s. But there's this organization that came to town in the 1980s called the Arizona Cardinals. And they needed a place for a practice facility. So the city of Tempe stepped forward, gave them land at the south end of the complex. It's still the home of the Arizona Cardinals today. That's where they practice during the week and before the season opens in the fall. To the north, off of Knox and Hardy, the police department decided they needed to build a substation in South Tempe. So nothing else had been built there yet, so let's give them some land, let them build a police substation. So Parks and Recreation, becoming concerned that sooner or later somebody is going to take all of that property for something else, decides to move forward with a project to develop the remainder of the site as a sports complex. And it became the largest sports complex in the city of Tempe. The original one, Diablo Stadium, was actually smaller than this in terms of the amenities it offered. So this became the largest sports complex in Tempe. 4 softball fields, 7 soccer fields, 1 multi-use field, a skate park, and it is the home to a tremendous amount of activity daily and nightly. In the last 5 years, pickleball courts were finally built. Does anybody here play pickleball? Okay, 1 person. 2. When did pickleball start? In the 1970s. 1970s outside of Seattle, Washington. And it started at a family picnic. There was drinking involved. And they decided to create this game, and they named it after their dog, Pickles. Pickles chased the wiffle ball that they were playing with, hence pickleball was born. Took it a long time to make its way to Tempe. Oops, I hit the wrong one. Anyways, these are later additions to the park system. So later in the 1990s, early 2000s, there was a lot of redevelopment occurring in Tempe. On Old A Street, there was an old concrete manufacturing facility. It went away, replaced with apartment complexes, but they needed a place to store their stormwater. That's a requirement now in the city of Tempe. Creamery Park, your bottom left. In Victory Acres, a park or a redevelopment project, some condos were proposed, and they needed a place to store their water. Alegre Park comes to being. Gakey Park, which had already existed but was further cut out for the development of the Southwest Gas Trail that runs through there. And then Escare Park, which is also in Victory Acres, was built as a retention basin for future projects along Apache Boulevard east of the 101 freeway. So new projects in Tempe generate new opportunities, and fortunately, those new opportunities sometimes translate into new parks for the citizens of Tempe. one I want to focus on, and that was the one in the middle of the screen, Hanger Park. Hanger Park is located in South Tempe, roughly the intersection of Rural and Knox. It's a little bit to the west of that intersection. And it is a major retention area for the Gila Drain, Gila Ditch. So how many of you said they lived in Tempe, I'll say prior to 1985? Do any of you remember the old culvert that ran along Rural Road once you got south of the Western Canal? That is the Gila Drain, Gila Ditch. It ran from the Western Canal and would deliver water all the way through South Tempe, all the way out to the Gila River in the Gila River Indian Reservation. So, couldn't develop on it, and it was pretty ugly. So, developers approached the city of Tempe and SRP because it was also for storm drainage. So a lot of storm water went into the ditch and went out. They needed a place to store the storm water so they could pump it back into the canal and use it for agricultural purposes. So the plan was they would tile or put pipes underground from the Western Canal all the way down to Knox, and then they would run through what is now the Warner Ranch development out to Ray Road, and then there's a canal that runs through Gila Springs, across the freeway, all the way to the Gila River Indian Reservation. That's Hanger Park. So when there's a huge rain event, as you can see in the bottom left, the park floods. And I mean it floods. It's not unusual in a major rain event for it to be several feet deep. The deepest I ever saw it, there was a rain event around 2014, and I think it was almost 10 feet deep. It was up to the rim on the basketball court. That's how deep the water was. But unlike other retention parks, the water doesn't stay there. After the canal recedes enough, they pump the water out back into the canal, and off it goes for either agricultural purposes or just to flow into the Gila River. But that was in the mid-90s that Tempe acquired that and worked very hard, not only with SRP, but with the developers to make all that happen. But interesting, because otherwise, that was a pretty unsightly ditch that ran along Rural Road for years. So, a couple of last possibilities, and I'm going to wrap it up. So, ADOT basins. Does everybody know about the ADOT basins? There's two of them in Tempe. One that is between Hardy and Kyrene, just south of US 60. But the bigger one, everybody sees it. You drive along the freeway. It's just before you reach Warner Road if you're going north, and it's along Knox on the south side. And it was used when they were building I-10 in the 1960s. They dug out dirt to build all the approaches for the overpasses over the freeway. So they dug that out for the purposes of building Chandler Boulevard, Ray Road, Warner Road, Elliott, Guadalupe, the overpasses over I-10 freeway. It's called a borrow pit. But when building I-10, they also created a huge problem because all the rainwater that used to come off South Mountain used to flow openly, and it would flow into that area of Tempe to the Gila Drain and then out to the Gila River Indian Reservation. Well, when they built I-10, it cut off all that rain flow. So if you go to the other side of the freeway, there's all kinds of culverts that lead into the ADOT basin. So the city has looked at, and I don't know where it may stand, it may never actually happen, how can they use those for some type of productive use? A park would be the most appropriate thing because they could retain the water, and then when the water recedes, it could be used for some type of purpose. Can't be used for development. And I'm going to wrap it up with where we are today. Refresh Tempe. Tempe is notorious for being phenomenal at building things, but horrible at maintaining them. Things wear out, particularly in parks. Sprinkler systems don't last forever. Playground equipment doesn't last forever. Lighting systems don't last forever. They need to be reinvested in periodically to continue to make them usable, and Tempe was notorious for not doing that. There is a plan now for Tempe to do that. refresh Tempe. And I'll give tremendous credit not only to the Tempe City Council for beginning this program, but for staff for continuing to bring it up for the council to do. So, in the next 5 years, proposed $134 million for park projects throughout Tempe. It may not all happen, but at least it's been identified and put on the table for the city council to consider to truly make Tempe's parks what they need to be for the future. Because we can't just build them, we have to maintain them. So, 2 pages from the current City of Tempe Capital Improvement Program budget, and hopefully most of this stuff gets built. And that's all, folks.
Well, gee, that was really interesting. Did you learn? I am amazed at this presentation. I've been around Tempe a long time, like Josh and most of you, but in the way you've put it together, it's absolutely incredible. So give them another big. We'll make you a permanent speaker here. By the way, would you share that with the museum, the PowerPoint, so that we can keep that?
Sure.
All right.
I have no more need for it.
Okay. You heard that, Josh. We're going to do that. Also, because of the quality of this, all of our presentations are now streamed live on Facebook, and then they're archived. So let others know about this history, because it really is remarkable. There's a couple of things that you talked about I just wanted to mention briefly. Everything that was related to the prisoner of war camp in Papago Park is gone, except through the Tempe Historic Preservation Foundation, a couple of the barracks that the officers were ensconced in are down in at Rio Salado and Priest. We're trying to find a permanent home. They've been in storage for a long time, so I don't know what condition they are now, but at least two of the barracks are still around. And then when you were talking about the first park just south of Broadway, one could see on the left side of that park, a little bit, and the other side of the railroad tracks on the west, was Tempe's airport. Yeah. I don't know how many know that Tempe, can I call it an international airport? From Phoenix to Tempe. But we did have an airport that came in right after World War II. Fellows used some of the monies that were available to military people, and they opened the airport, and it lasted for about 7 years, something like that. And now it's a development. We have just a little bit of time. Does anybody have any questions, or did it all get answered? I think I'm floored. This is really, truly one of the best presentations I think that we have. So again, I want to thank you. Also, as a token of appreciation, we have 29 cents here for you.
Thank you.
And so we're buying your PowerPoint presentation. Also, it's our tradition to provide each presenter with a memory of Tempe's history. Unfortunately, we don't have one for the parks, but you know Dick Nearing.
Yeah, I do.
Yeah, Dick Nearing, fabulous pen and ink artist, passed away a couple of years ago. This fellow was absolutely incredible. Yes.
I do have a question about the development of Tempe.
Wait.
Okay. If I don't know the answer, I'm going to make it up.
No, I think you do. I do have a question about Tempe Town Lake. I moved to Tempe in 2000 from Austin, Texas, which has a lake.
Yep.
And I heard the people complaining about Tempe Town Lake. You wouldn't make it. What's happened to Tempe Town Lake since that first dam was put in to today?
Well, the town lake really, the lake itself, the body of water, really hasn't changed much. It's pretty much as it was when it opened to the public in 1999. The development around it, frankly, is staggering. Does everybody remember the first thing that got built? The Peabody Hotel? Yeah, well, the Peabody Hotel didn't get built, but that was the anchor development, and it was adjacent to what was then ASU's golf course, the Karsten Golf Course. And it was what they called the linchpin. So it was what caused the rest of the financial plan to make sense. That development never got built. But the rest of it, I don't think anybody could have envisioned what ended up going in. Now, whether you like what's gone in or not, but what has gone in has dramatically exceeded the city's expectations as far as development to finance the maintenance and operations of the lake. And one thing I just want to add to, when I talked about the Kibbe decision and 100 years later, so Tempe, because of that Kibbe decision, has one of the most robust water portfolios in the valley. And that's important because water is important to people. But that, too, is what helped the city of Tempe be able to put the water in the lake. Anybody know how much an acre-foot of water costs today? So Salt River Project manages all the water, and an acre-foot of water is about 325,000 gallons. It's a lot of water. It's 43 cents. 43 cents for raw water. Now, it's not that cheap to deliver it. It's a lot more expensive. But the raw water itself, 43 cents today. And that is very important for Town Lake and to be able to maintain and operate it. So I don't know if that fully answers your question, but again, the development around it far exceeded what Tempe had anticipated. Far exceeded.
Yeah, the real reason Tempe did it, well, first it was a pretty sad state of affairs. It was really just a junkyard along as it went through the city. But the real reason was economic development. They knew if we build it, they will come, and they have come in extraordinary ways. And there's also a special taxing district for the properties built along the lake. So I think basically residents are getting the lake for free.
So one thing I did want to mention as well is you identified Austin. The people who were originally on the city side that were in charge, they envisioned it more like San Antonio. The Riverwalk, yeah, which I never thought that made any sense because the Riverwalk's maybe, 40, 50 feet wide? Yeah, so it just never made sense to me, but Austin always did. But Austin is far more park-oriented around its perimeter and not development-oriented. This was specifically an economic development project.
And John McCain, before he passed away, was very energetic, and I forgot what it's called now, but wanted to continue what Tempe has done through Phoenix, and there's still a group of people working on it. It's only about money, so that's not a big deal. Anyway, I was saying that Richard Nearing, our very good friend, he was on the society board, did a whole series of books and incredible pen and ink drawings. I hated him, actually. I once hit his fingers with a hammer, but that didn't stop him from I can't draw a straight line. So this is our best memory. This is the Peterson house, which we're working on to build a barn. One more thank you for Mark Richwine. Let me just finish up really fast because we're running a little bit late. Next month, February is Black History Month, and so one of the features of the lunch talks during that period, it's an unusual subject, and I hope that you'll find the presentation interesting. Arizona's African American barbers, something we don't think a lot about. Alfred Thomas, was that it? one of the first the first African-American barbers in Tempe. Last year, we dedicated a headstone for him at Double Butte because he was really in an unmarked grave. So Dallas Teat will be here next month. I hope that you'll pick up the sheets that are on the back table because there's a whole host of activities for the month of February. And the one thing I want to point out in particular is a movie that will be showing on Tuesday, February 11th, 5:30. I don't know why that's so early in the afternoon, but it's called the 6888 documentary, and this is the story of African American women in World War II. It's really a fascinating documentary, and that's one that you might want to see. And as it is always here at the museum and and the activities that we do, everything is free, except for membership in the Tempe History Society. How many are members? Very good. The rest of you don't come back next month if you can't become a member because it's really cheap to do that. I think $20. But we need that membership in order to secure grants, things of that sort, because grantors want to know how much community participation there is with your organization. So that is it. Thank you for coming out. Happy New Year to you again. Thanks to Mark Richwine, and we'll see you in another month. I think, well, Gary is not here. You can do that at the front desk. We have membership forms, and we really would appreciate if you take a few minutes and become a member of the society.